And they arrest him, and they actually want 90 years in jail for him. And the reason being, even though he sold the marijuana in his home was 3 miles within a school district and 3 miles within a housing project, and all these escalating things happened, and they wanted, so they plea bargained him, and they settled on a sentence of 26 years in state prison. And I heard about this. Somebody sent this to me, Mark. This is, and I checked, and they don't even give determinations like that in China, and the worst place in the world. So we tried to help him. We created a big hue and cry. I have organizations throughout the United States. I formed the BC Marijuana Party a couple of years ago as sort of a self-defense, and we participated in elections in British Columbia. And we've formed 20 U.S. state marijuana parties in the United States. They're funded to some degree or largely by me. And we have one in Alabama. So we got together and we got all the media outrage. I even got the Toronto Sun to fly down to Alabama to interview this fellow and cover what was going on and how many other people were just dying away in Alabama jails for decades and decades for the most inconsequential of things. And I'll tell you about one of those in a second. But anyway, Webster got sentenced to 26 years, and we made a big hue and cry. Rolling Stone went down to interview everybody, and they made a big hue and cry just before his sentencing review was last week. And 26 years is 312 months. And the judge saying that these activists had nothing to do with it, to the public, to the gallery, but cut his sentence down to 1 month and another 9 months on work release, meaning he's got a full-time job. He can work during the day and go back to the prison at night and on weekends. So to some degree, you know, we've shaved 311 months off his sentence of 312 months. And Rolling Stone was kind enough to imply that I had a lot to do with that, and probably I had some to do with it anyway. But the fact is that young man shouldn't spend a night in jail. And you know, people tell me, and there's another fellow too, and we have lots of these, you know, some people you can't help, but Douglas Lamar Gray has been in an Alabama jail since 1992 with life sentence without parole. That's an indeterminate number, well beyond 25. Life sentence without parole for buying, just buying, not selling, buying 1 pound of marijuana from an undercover officer in 1992. He was 22 years of age, he has 2 children, and he's been serving 11 years since then for buying 1 pound of marijuana. This goes on all over the world, but especially in the United States. And it doesn't just happen in the United States. People say, oh, thank goodness that wouldn't happen here. But in fact, it does happen here. One of the other cases I'm spending lots of money on is a fellow in Halifax Penitentiary. His name is Michael Patriquin. Now, Michael Patriquin actually has a legal exemption from the Canadian government to grow marijuana and possess marijuana. And in fact, he's been doing this all his life, and he was convicted of growing and selling 4.5 kilograms, about 10 or 11 pounds of marijuana. And he was sentenced to 6 years in jail, which they intend to make him serve. He's in his 2nd year, but he needs the marijuana because he had a car accident 10 years ago, and he's all crippled up. He's in a really bad way, and they give him lots of drugs that make him nauseous and for his accident. And the only thing that keeps him from being nauseous is marijuana. But they won't let him have it in prison, even though he has a legal requirement. So we're spending lots of money, and we've got a decision coming back in the next week. We're trying to force the federal government to allow him to eat some marijuana cookies, maybe 3 or 4 a day. That's all. We're just asking him. He can get marijuana in jail. But the funny thing is that if you smoke marijuana and your urine test, which they do on him all the time, tests positive, then he gets put in solitary confinement, where he won't be able to get the marijuana, and he won't have any company, and it'll just be a dark black hole. And he's already lost 65 pounds. He was 210 pounds. Now he's 138 pounds. He loses more weight every week. And all we're asking for, the federal government, is to let him have a marijuana cookie, which he's legally allowed to have. And he's serving 6 years. And he's not contesting the 6 years anymore. In order to sue the federal government, we have to take away all those claims and just get to the 6 years. So it does happen in Canada. People are wasting away in jail for the want of a marijuana cookie they're allowed to have, serving 6 years in jail. By the way, that 10 pounds of marijuana, I had something called the Toker's Bowl, which I do every year in Vancouver. We have 250 people. In fact, a lot of people from Idea City in the past have come, by the way. And I won't name names, but you might meet them tonight. And we have this big ceremony. I have 25 different kinds of marijuana. But basically, throughout the weekend, I distribute 20 pounds of marijuana. Everybody gets 25 1-gram samples, 250 people, times, you know, everybody's got 1 ounce. It's about like, we give out 20 pounds. And I'm thinking, here's a man sparing 6 years in a Canadian jail for just distributing half of what I give out routinely. And I'm thinking, wow, that's shocking. And of course, the Canadian government has new proposals for marijuana, and they're proposing something that I'm calling recriminalization, because actually Ontario is the one jurisdiction in the whole world, in the whole Western world, where marijuana is absolutely legal. You can possess it, you won't get charged, and I plan to have a demonstration in front of the Toronto Police Headquarters tomorrow at 4:20 in the afternoon. It's been announced, and I'm sorry to say I'll have to miss that speaker, but I will be down the street in front of the Toronto Police Headquarters smoking marijuana and quite obviously possessing it and daring the police to take it away from me, because there have been 2 court decisions here in Ontario that have validated that there is no marijuana law, that the government has failed in the past to provide adequate medical marijuana laws, and you can tell that when a guy has to basically starve to death just to get a marijuana cookie in jail. There's no marijuana laws. Of May 16th, Justice Stephen Rogan said, listen, the government's been very negligent and derelict, and the previous court of, so basically there's no marijuana law. This is the first place in the Western world where marijuana is completely free of any kind of legal sanction. So I hope you'll all celebrate that with me tonight as I bring you some of the marijuana we had at the Toker's Bowl. Fine stuff it is. But I don't want to distract with, we can do the celebration of the marijuana culture later on. I want to tell you something else I did that hopefully will render this all inert, in that I for 8 years have been guiding some fellow litigants and defendants who've been accused of marijuana offenses finally to get to the Supreme Court. There's never been a marijuana case that got to the Supreme Court since we've had the Charter of Rights, and that's 1982. So 20 years have passed. Marijuana, I finally was able to pay for, I'm the chief sponsor and pay for, finally getting these 3 people to the Supreme Court in the first weekend of May. And the Supreme Court heard our argument. And the argument was basically one simple passion. Why should anyone ever go to jail for even a day for possessing or growing or distributing one of the most revered and righteous and useful plants ever known to mankind? I mean, even if we recognize, as the Constitution says, we recognize the supremacy of God as the first words in the Constitution, surely this was put here for a reason, and that grows everywhere on this planet for a reason. I mean, Carl Sagan, we've had a lot of scientists earlier today, and when I think about the scientists, I thought about the cosmos. Carl Sagan smoked marijuana every day of his adult life. He developed every scientific theory by his own words and is what his wife has told me on marijuana. He used to smoke in the morning, he used to smoke at night, he used to doodle in the shower after he'd smoked it. If you took your CD collection, by the way, and divided it between the people who created that music on marijuana and put that to one side, and who did not use marijuana on the other side, I have no doubt every single one of you would say, no, I'm keeping the marijuana guys. Okay?